I've noticed that a lot of bloggers and people on Instagram make life in Paris so perfect. Hello YouTube! This video is not at all intended to be negative or a downer, but I wanted to do a video on the downsides of life abroad as an expat. I think it's a little bit easy with the smoke screen of Instagram and how perfect my life is and look how much travel I'm doing, and every experience is so enlightening, and all of those things can be true, but there are also things that aren't that great, let's be honest. And I know that these are really first world problems to have, like, oh poor me, I'm living abroad and there are things I don't like. But honestly, it can be hard, and I don't want to discount anyone's negative experiences either, because being an expat isn't all roses. So firstly, what is an expat? Well, an expat compared to an immigrant, for example, is someone who's living abroad in a host country that's not their native country, and it tends to have a temporary intention. So it means that, you know, it may last 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is. But the idea in general with an expat is someone who's temporarily living in a new country with the intention that they may eventually move away to another country, or they may return back to their home country. So it's all about the intent. Whereas an immigrant is someone who moves to a country with the intention to live there for the rest of their lives effectively. And so already in that mindset, it's a little bit odd, because of course you want to immerse yourself in the culture and the country and to integrate to the fullest extent. There's something always in the back of your mind which is a little bit like, maybe I'll never really be one of them. So already there's a little bit of a mindset thing that's a bit tricky being an expat. But in terms of the things that can be actually really tough being an expat, I guess I'll start with something that really hits you when you first arrive, which is that everything takes so much more effort than it did back home. So just going to the supermarket, trying to figure out what things are, where things are, maybe it's in a new language, maybe it's tricky to read the labels, but just little things like in France, it took me ages to figure out what the equivalent to sour cream was, until I realized that there wasn't really a direct equivalent. And sometimes it's the smallest things. You get back at the end of a long day and you're like, okay, I did my grocery shopping and I went to the post office and it took the whole day, because everything just takes so much longer and you have to do a lot of research. Just little things that you think about that you would have never thought about, like, oh, that person spoke to me in that way, what does that mean? Or they looked at me that way, what does that mean? Or like, I need to find a hammer and nails, where do I go? Like, which stores sell that? I mean, everything just takes a lot more time, a lot more effort, and it can be really tiring at first. The second point, and it's something that you need to get over pretty quickly if you really want to live long term in a country, but you can't help but compare. It's really human to be like, oh, that's different, oh, that's new, oh, that's better, oh, that's worse, to your home country. And I think, honestly, I mean, I feel sorry for the people around me, because I talk about New Zealand a lot, like, oh, in New Zealand it's like this, in New Zealand it's like that, in New Zealand we say this. And I mean, at some point it's kind of like, not get over it, but I mean, you've got to kind of let your home country go a little bit so that you can fully just take life in your new country as it is, because some things are going to be better and some things are really going to be worse. And it's when you start getting into the cycle of, like, you know, for Paris, for example, like, why are people so unfriendly here compared to New Zealand? Why is it that way? And, you know, if you get into that and you get upset by that, I mean, it's a vicious cycle, honestly, and there's no answer to it. The answer is, okay, some countries just do things better, or are better at some certain things, or are better fit for you in certain ways on certain aspects. And sorry, but it's kind of like you either like it or you lump it, and it's something that can be quite hard to accept. Of course, I'm not going to spend too much on the obvious around missing friends and family, because that's just, I don't really need to explain that, it's pretty obvious. But there is something that I wasn't really expecting around friendships, which is that because you are establishing a new life somewhere else and you're trying to make friends and build contacts, and you're investing so much time and energy into your new life, so to speak, what you realize is that back home you kind of have to just choose a few really best friends that you're going to keep in touch with, because it's like you can't really have it all. You can't try and actively and proactively have a social life in France and try and meet new people and go out and have new friends and be in touch with 15 people back home every day. It's just sort of impossible. So I had to make the cut basically, and I have my 2 best friends, sisters in the world who I keep in touch with. I try to keep in touch with basically every day. They're the non-negotiables. When I go home, I'm seeing them. Then you had the next layer of the onion, right? Like the people that you really like ex-colleagues and old school friends and people that you'd love to catch up with and you'd love to see and you get along really well, but you just can't really keep in touch with them, maybe a few times a year. And when you get home, it's like, if you have the time. And it's really sad because as the years go on, obviously these friends become acquaintances and people you used to know and used to hang out with. And I know that if I ever moved back, I mean, I could definitely pick things up with them, but at some point you do have to let some people go a little bit, even if it's temporarily, because you just can't do both. The other downside is that in having the best of both worlds, so I have both New Zealand and France, I'm also always missing something. When I'm in France, I'm missing the nature of New Zealand, the friendly people, the laid-back attitude, the easy life, basically, everything relaxed and people laughing and happy and that kind of stuff. When I go back to New Zealand, I'm missing the food in France, the simple pleasures, the travel, the vacations, how cultivated people are, that you're talking about current events and politics and history and these kinds of things. It's sort of like you've got the best of both worlds, but you're always missing something no matter where you are. So I know that if we go back to live in New Zealand one day, there'll be so much about France that we'll miss, and it's the same vice versa, and it's sort of like, you can never have it all. Another upside slash downside, it's a little bit of a paradox, but you grow and you learn and you experience so many things living in a new culture, new country, new language, that you fundamentally change as a person. It's impossible not to change. You'd be a robot if you were able to live in a country for 5 years and go back as exactly the same person. And everyone changes. It's part of growing up. We naturally evolve. I mean, even if you're still living in the same town where you were born and you grew up, I mean, over time you will change a little bit. But I think we can all agree that the change curve when you live abroad is like whoop. Your self-awareness and your emotional intelligence and your ability to relate to other people and your empathy for other cultures. I mean, I wouldn't give it up for the world. But you go home and you realize that you're a little bit different. Sometimes that causes people to drift apart, and that's part of the game. Another thing that's a little bit tricky after being an expat is that speaking to people from back home and you're talking to them about the things that you're doing and seeing and travel and everything, it's hard not to feel like you're bragging, because life can sound so magical from the outside. When we're talking about holiday destinations, we're like, oh, we'd like to go to Greece, or we'd like to go to Croatia or something like that, and people are just like, oh my gosh. Maybe that seems relatively normal for Europeans, but for New Zealanders, I mean, that's something of a dream. Like, you must be millionaires. Like, how do you do it? Like, oh wow, you guys really made it, you know. But over here it's kind of normal. And then on the other hand, which is kind of the opposite problem, is that you don't have the right almost to complain or be down anymore. I think it's particularly bad in Paris, because Paris is such a hyped up city, and I've noticed that a lot of bloggers and people on Instagram make life in Paris like so perfect. It's so picture perfect. And there are downsides to living in the city, as I'm pretty sure every French person could attest, right? I mean, I know a lot of French people who are like, I would never live in Paris. Sort of like, if I try and bring them up, and if I need someone to talk to, if I just want to vent about it, if I just want to have a little bit of a moan or complain about it, I just feel like I come across as so ungrateful, or like there's something wrong with me. Like, how could she not like Paris? Like, what's wrong with her? Paris is amazing. Paris is perfect. People would kill to live in Paris. I think it's because it is so kind of hyped and maybe overhyped, and it's such a dream of so many people. You keep a lot to yourself, actually. And it can be pretty tough to keep it all in sometimes. Anyways guys, that's just what I had on my mind for this video. Of course, these downsides will never take away from all of the richness that this experience can give you. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here doing it. But I think it's important to have these conversations sometimes and be like honest about how it really is, or at least how it really is for me. So thank you for listening, thank you for watching. I'm sure I'm not the only one, so let me know down below if you've ever experienced something similar, or if you have any questions or fears about potentially moving abroad. I absolutely check my comments, and I will be down there replying to you. Please feel free to ask me questions. I'm happy to answer those as well. And otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next video. Adianto!